I was shocked, but immediately my concern is to try the health, welfare, and safety of the child.
Did you hear anything when the child was dropped from the top of the bridge?
I did. I heard a faint scream and a splash.
John was putting salt around the house for weeks to keep out evil spirits. He said that his son said that Phoebe was possessed.
This is insane.
Okay.
All right, fine.
Just give us a couple minutes, okay?
Thank you. I'm being manipulated. That's what's going on.
We are recapping the case of a man who went on trial for murdering his 5-year-old daughter in an absolutely horrifying and unthinkable way. It is the story of Jonchuck. And it's not just the crime itself, but the defense that left all of us watching every minute. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey, so we have another trial that we want to recap for you here on Sidebar. And as I mentioned, this is something that we want to continue to do because we have covered so many different kinds of trials on the Law&Crime network in the past several years that you might have missed it. And these are not only compelling stories, but they're important ones to tell. And the one I want to talk about right now, I remember covering this one. I remember it was emotional to talk about this one. It is an absolutely awful crime. It is a crime that when I tell you what happened, when I describe it, the headline of it is as shocking as the details. A man out in Tampa, Florida, went on trial for murdering his 5-year-old daughter by throwing her off a bridge. Yes. Little girl's body falls 70 feet below into the Tampa Bay. This is the case of Jonchuck. Trial we covered back in 2019. He was charged with first-degree murder of his daughter, Phoebe, 5 years old. And I want to go through this trial because, as you will see, it was the defense that really highlighted an important legal question for this jury. But first, I have to lay out what happened on January 8th, 2015 on the Dick Meisner Bridge. You know, normally I would start this recap with the prosecution's opening statement, but I'd rather start with the firsthand account of Officer William Vickers from the St. Petersburg Police Department, because he has a firsthand account of this, and he explains how he observed then 25-year-old Jonchuck speeding by on his way to the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. He ends up confronting Jonchuck as he stops the car on the Meisner Bridge. This is a smaller bridge. And I'm just going to allow Officer Vickers to explain what happens next.
And what happened next?
The driver was already out of the vehicle and began approaching me with something large in his hand. Based on training that I've seen, at that point I was fearful for a violent encounter. I drew my firearm and maintained it in a low ready with the anticipation of a firefight. The driver continued to approach me. I ordered them back into the car. They did not respond. As they continued to approach, the driver yelled, "You have no free will," and crossed in between the two cars. At that point, the driver walked around to the passenger side and reached in. I ordered the driver to show me their hands. They still did not comply. At that point, I was still anticipating a violent encounter, possibly firearm related. The driver emerged from the vehicle holding a small child who appeared to be asleep at the time, turned and let the child go over the side of the bridge. I was shocked, but immediately my concern is to try the health, welfare, and safety of the child.
Did you hear anything when the child was dropped from the top of the bridge?
I did. I heard a faint scream and a splash.
What happened to the defendant, the driver of the vehicle?
The driver returned to his vehicle, crossed between our two vehicles, and left.
Which way did he drive?
South on 275.
Toward the Skyway?
Yes, sir.
And what did you do?
Immediately ran to the edge of the bridge, looking for any sign of life, something in the water. I didn't see anything at all at that point. It was very cold and windy that night. My options were limited. I did notice that there was a service ladder to the left of me, which would have been the south. I immediately climbed down the service ladder, calling the entire way down. and worked my way down to like a safety bumper area for the supports for the bridge, where I continued to call and try and look for the girl.
It is truly an unthinkable and heinous act. The medical examiner testified that Phoebe died of drowning. So Jonchuck, as you can imagine, was ultimately arrested, pretty clear there. But here's the question. Why would he do this? Why would he do this? Why would he throw his 5-year-old daughter off of a bridge? Well, according to the prosecution, Jonchuck had some very serious issues with Phoebe's mother and his own mother, and he didn't want to lose custody, that this was an act of vengeance. Listen to this portion of the prosecution's opening statement.
We are confident that with the evidence in this case, you will see that the defendant, Jonchuck Jr., committed this murder to punish his mother and the mother of Phoebe Jonchuck. He told his own mother 3 days before the murder that he would up the rest of her life, and he made good on that promise. That little girl was the only light that she had, and he struck at her heart when he killed that child. The mother of that little girl, Michelle Kerr, wanted her back, and he knew that he stood to lose her now that she was stable, had a boyfriend with a job and a place to stay where Phoebe could live with them. He was threatened by that. He was threatened with losing the Social Security money that he received for having Phoebe. And in one act, he struck at both of them to punish both his mother and the mother of Phoebe. When he committed this murder, he was angry. His world was falling apart.
By the way, there were two theories of first-degree murder here for the jury to consider. Either this was premeditated, right? Jonchuck intended to kill Phoebe. He had this moment of reflection. He had a moment to deliberate on this, but he chose to kill her, and he did so. Or this could be felony murder, whereby Jonchuck killed Phoebe during the course of a felony. And here that would be aggravated child abuse. So you don't need to prove that he had an intent to kill, but an intent to harm, and that resulted in Phoebe's death. You know what's difficult? You know what's tough? Reading through legal briefs and filings to prepare for Sidebar. It's like I'm back in law school. Being told I look like Dennis Reynolds every single time I check the comments. That wears on you. At this point, I think people think he hosts the show. Again, it's tough. But you know what's not difficult? Starting a claim with Morgan & Morgan. How about that transition, by the way? Well, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm, they make the process as easy as possible for their clients, because from starting your claim to uploading documents to talking to your legal team, it can all be done from your smartphone. There's no upfront fee. You only pay them if you win. And speaking winning, Morgan & Morgan, they have a track record of securing verdicts and settlements in the multi-millions. So if you're injured, this may be the firm you want in your corner. You can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. So you might be saying right now, I don't know, seems like a pretty straightforward case, Jesse, especially when you have an eyewitness, a police officer, see what happened on the bridge, saw this happen with his own eyes, right? Was this a one-day case? Were they able to convict him in 15 minutes? You know what complicated this? The defense.
What happened just after midnight on January 8th of 2015 was tragic. That night, Jonchuck Jr. took his daughter, whom he loved more than anybody in the world, and dropped her over the side of the Dick Meisner Bridge. It didn't make sense at the time. It doesn't make sense today. It will never make sense, because it is insanity.
The insanity defense. Yes, in Florida, this is an affirmative defense, meaning even if you find that Jonchuck killed his daughter, he can't be held legally responsible. He should be found not guilty. Now, as you know, insanity is incredibly tough to argue, incredibly tough to prove. And yes, the burden is on the defense to show this. And in Florida, insanity means that the defendant had a mental infirmity, disease, or defect, and because of this condition, the defendant either didn't know what he or she was doing or its consequences, or, although the defendant knew what he or she was doing and its consequences, the defendant did not know that what he or she was doing was wrong. So in other words, it could be somebody who throws their daughter off the bridge and thought it was a book bag, didn't realize that it was his daughter, or yes, realized that he threw his daughter off the bridge but didn't realize this was a crime, didn't think that this was wrong. And unfortunately, we've seen cases like that before. But what we are essentially looking at here is if someone is found not guilty by reason of insanity, then they could be committed to a mental health institution, either for the rest of their life or until such time that they're no longer a danger to themselves or society, rather than, of course, what he was looking at here, being found guilty and life in prison. So there's a lot at stake here. And I want you to listen a little bit more to the defense in their opening statement talking about Jonchuck's mental state.
This case didn't start in January of 2015. Unfortunately, Mr. Jonchuck has struggled with mental illness since he was a small child. From about the age of 5, he is being seen by mental health professionals at the University of South Florida. And unfortunately, for Mr. Jonchuck, mental health treatment was never the focus of the adults in his life. Now you'll hear that from 5 years old until about 14, he was going to USF to receive treatment for something having to do with his psychiatric state.
This is where the defense explores this insanity defense more. For example, back to the eyewitness of this crime, Officer Vickers. Listen to what he said he observed about Jonchuck. And this is when he was questioned by Jonchuck's defense attorney.
Got the child in his arms, but he's looking back at you.
Yes, sir.
And I think you told us he just has a blank expression on his face.
That's correct.
And you are still in that same position you described to us, still ready with your gun if needed.
Yes, sir.
And still telling him now, at this time, it's no longer get back in the car, it's I want to see your hands.
Yes, sir.
I'm guessing because you, although he's got the child in one arm, you can't see this hand, can you?
I couldn't see if he got anything in the vehicle or if he had anything in his waistband or anything else like that.
Right, so that's, you didn't want him reaching for anything.
That's correct.
He disregards that command as well, right?
Yes, sir.
And reaches over the bridge and lets her go.
That's correct.
You didn't drop her, didn't hold her by the leg and drop her over the bridge.
No, it was all one motion.
And then after that, walks back around and gets back in his car
Yes, sir.
and leaves in an apparently calm manner.
That's correct.
So you couple that with the odd statement, you have no free will, that Jonchuck allegedly made before he throws his daughter off the bridge, and it does give support for this idea. Did he not know what he was doing, really? In fact, listen to what Detective Jared Huff had to say when Jonchuck was brought in, and let's play some portion of the defendant's police interrogation after his arrest too.
Traffic stop, brought the 15 or 20 minutes or so to the station, and handcuffed to the chair. He asked you if he could see his Bible, right?
That's correct.
Okay. John asked you if Phoebe was okay. I think he used the word all right.
I believe that's accurate.
I went looking for answers. I've always had problems growing up, like wondering who I was and how and what my purpose was. And ever since yesterday and a couple days before,
Like what? The problems, how do you think you're different?
Well, it's like, I don't know, like when I went to the church
What church?
St. Paul's Catholic Church, and I spoke to Father Bill. He told me that I wasn't going to be ready this Easter, but next Easter, and that I was the Pope. That Francis or whatever is not like.
So he's not the real Pope?
Yes. And my grandma's name, and I do have Greek heritage, believe it or not. My grandma's maiden name is Vladimir. And it's always been weird, and I've had people coming up to me recently and asking me what my name is, and I've only been able to say John. Prior to this, weeks prior to this, like, and they would ask me what my last name is, and I would just say John.
But you just physically couldn't say your last name, or
It just-
Jonchuck, or he's just John?
It was just John for some reason, and it's like I really had to kind of think about it. Something is not right, because people are coming in here. I've never said anything about Michael, and like besides at a church today, this lady comes in and gets inside of the police car with me when I'm in the back, and Terry, and starts telling me, this is insane.
Okay. Just give us a couple minutes, okay?
Thank you. I'm being manipulated. That's what's going on. Conspiracy, conspiracy, conspiracy.
Now, again, the defense said this wasn't just a sudden break from reality that happened all at once, that just conveniently happened at the time that he killed his daughter. I say conveniently because that would help a legal defense, right? Oh, he was insane at that time. No, what they're saying is that there were long-standing issues even before what happened here. For example, Jonchuck's father was called to the stand, and he testified about an odd practice of his sons.
When he was living with you in around Christmas time, did John pour salt around the house?
Yes,
Did he pour salt around the windows?
yes,
Did he pour salt around the door to Phoebe's bedroom?
I don't know about that.
Or how about Genevieve Torres, a custody attorney that called 911 on Jonchuck because of his behavior?
Well, then I closed the door, and then I start talking about the paperwork. You know, I start talking about, you ready to move forward? And at that point, he was not really interested into talking about the paternity case. It was the paperwork. He wasn't interested in that. He said, you know, that's going to sound weird or strange. He said weird or strange. I'm not one of those words. It's going to sound weird, but I really think that, I think you're saying Genevieve. And it caught me off guard clearly. So I kind of said, I was like, no, you know, I'm definitely not. He's like, no, you're saying Genevieve. I know you are. You just came back from the city of Babylon, which was Montreal. To him was Babylon. So I said, I insisted that I wasn't. And then he said from there, well, then if you're not saying Genevieve, then you must be God. And that then the conversation, and he was serious. Like, he wasn't joking around at that point. Like, his tone changed. And then he was serious. He was like, you God, you're a creator. And I said, no, and I'm definitely not God. And I'm starting to be a little, not at that point I knew something was not right.
Or how about this? Just hours before Jonchuck killed Phoebe, he seemingly sought a baptism from a priest. And this priest testified that he observed that Jonchuck was suffering from mental illness. And different mental health professionals rendered their opinion on Jonchuck too.
Going back to when Mr. Jonchuck first came in January of 2015, did you believe Mr. Jonchuck to be experiencing psychosis?
I believe so.
Okay. Any doubt in your mind?
No doubt about it.
Okay.
At 16, he's already had a long history of mental health problems?
Yes.
What's the next thing you noticed that was important to you?
We jumped to age 21. He began seeing a psychiatrist. He also described that John at the time was having manic episodes, and in particular he saw John as having difficulties with irritability and having anger problems.
Now, you mentioned that bipolar used to be called manic depression. So these reports are from back in 2011. Is this manic episodes, is that an indication of manic depression?
Or bipolar disorder, either one. The next note that is highlighted is from December 2012 when he was 23 years old. Some of the symptoms that Dr. Arthur noted was that John was experiencing somatic hallucinations. So now he's experiencing hallucinations where he's feeling his skin bubbling, but there's no evidence that his skin is actually bubbling. He quoted John as saying, "I'm losing it." John was putting salt around the house for weeks to keep out evil spirits. He said that his son said that Phoebe was possessed. He had asked for this big Swedish brown Bible from his stepmother. It's early January. And as soon as he got this Bible, he heard a knocking coming from the Bible, which he didn't know what that was about. That would be an auditory hallucination.
And how about the keeping out evil spirits? Is that a delusion?
Yes, that would be like a paranoid delusion, that evil spirits were coming after him.
And how about Phoebe being possessed? Is that a
Same,
delusion?
paranoid delusions.
Did an evaluation to offer an opinion in court as to whether Mr. Jonchuck was not guilty by reason of insanity, have you formed that opinion?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
That he was insane at the time of the offense.
What we've talked about so far, for the most part, is what part of that two-prong analysis?
Well, first of all, that the first prong is that he has a mental disorder, and he has a very severe mental disorder. He has a mental disorder that causes him to be out of touch with reality.
I'd now like you to talk to us about the second part of your opinion, which allows you to form the opinion of not guilty by reason of insanity. Can you tell us what that part of your opinion is?
That he did not know the wrongfulness of his behaviors.
Okay, so clearly some very compelling evidence put forward by the defense for the jury to consider, right? Okay. The prosecution, though, they weren't going to take this insanity defense lying down. No, for example, they say there's a whole problem with this psychosis, because what happens if this psychosis is from your own voluntary choices and not something you can't control?
In September of 2014, he also heard the voices getting louder, right?
That's when they initiated, he reported.
Now, he reported to you that in September of 2014, when the voices were getting louder, he noticed that when he was using drugs, that had an effect on the voices getting louder, right?
That it increased it, yes.
It increased it. What kind of drugs was he taking in September of 2014 when the voices were increased?
He reported that he was smoking spice.
And what else?
He used crystal meth a couple of times.
Now, as a doctor who's conducting your sanity evaluation, you have to eliminate drug use on the date of offense, correct?
Yes.
Because if he's on drugs when he commits the murder, then he's not insane, right?
That is what case law says, yes.
So if he is on drugs when he commits the murder, and that is what is causing the psychosis, if the drugs are causing the psychosis, then he's not insane, correct?
Then I would not give that opinion.
that he is insane, right?
He was insane.
And in this particular case, you're relying on the defendant telling you that he was not using drugs on the date of offense, correct?
I'm using his self-report as well as the reports of family members who observed him that month, as well as individuals who evaluated him at that time, police officers, as well as attorney and priest reports that indicated that he did not appear to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs.
And as far as mental illness goes, you agree that mental illness does not, or the presence of mental illness doesn't automatically equal insanity, right?
Correct.
There's a second prong to that, correct?
Yes.
You have to, in order to be insane, not understand the nature of your actions, the consequences, right?
Correct.
Or you don't understand the wrongfulness of your actions, correct?
Correct.
Okay. In your opinion, did Mr. Jonchuck, the defendant in this case, know what he was doing when he dropped Phoebe off the bridge?
Factually, the information that I have is that he did have that information. He did have that appreciation.
Can't be insane if the drugs cause you to have a break from reality. And that's a fair question, not only about what Jonchuck knew, but is he a reliable narrator? Is he being honest?
He was very quiet, non-emotional, except for a couple of times he would almost appear to be trying to make himself to forcefully cry. And then that time would only last.
You can answer.
Would only last for like a couple of seconds, and it would just go back to like a blank look.
It didn't appear to be genuine crying to you?
No, it was not. It was like he was forcing himself to create tears.
Hey, so I'm going to take a guess and say that a lot of you who watch Sidebar might be business owners, maybe even thinking of starting a little side hustle. Well, if that's the case, I want to talk to you about our amazing sponsor, Odoo. So Odoo is a free all-in-one business management software that provides you with a range of applications that helps with the day-to-day of owning a business. Now, as some of you might know, I'm the host and executive producer of a very popular YouTube show called Prime Crime. It's on our Law&Crime page. So this is like managing a business, and I want you to watch this. Say if we ever charge for Prime Crime, and to be clear, we have no plans to do that, so don't worry, I could seamlessly and for free build a Prime Crime website with Odoo and put a built-in checkout page on the website with very little effort. Monthly subscriptions, it's even easier. Look how easy that was. 5 minutes later, I now have primecrime.com. So thank you to Odoo for sponsoring Sidebar, and thank you for getting me a Prime Crime website. You can build your website now. Domain is free for the first year when you use our link odoo.com/LC Sidebar. And also listen to the prosecution's expert witness, psychologist Dr. Peter Burston, who disagreed with this whole insanity argument because he believes Mr. Jonchuck was not insane, but rather he was manipulative.
She indicated that Mr. Jonchuck could be nice when he wanted to get something, primarily money, but would very rapidly have very rapid mood swings where the niceness would turn into anger, particularly if he didn't get the money or didn't get his way. So she described him as frequently setting her up by trying to sweet talk, for lack of better terms, to get what he wanted, but frequently return to anger and just a very negative type of relationship. And then again, she indicated that he would often put on a good show. So she described a personality that was not real authentic, put on a good show to get what he wanted from her, but then just use her for the money.
Now, to be clear, Dr. Burston also said that Jonchuck may have mental illness, but despite voices telling him both he and Phoebe had to die, isn't it curious that only Phoebe died? Why did he just decide to run away, right? He didn't jump off the bridge too. Isn't that a bit curious to consider? And I will tell you, some of the most powerful evidence that Jonchuck committed a deliberate, purposeful, knowing, evil act came from Michelle Jonchuck, the defendant's mom.
And then that's the night that he took Phoebe.
And he told you he was going to up
Well,
your
he
life.
told me he was going to my whole life up.
And about the Chinese drywall, you would actually taste some of the food, right? Some of the canned food? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't any good, was it?
Some of the food wasn't right.
Right. Even though the can said that the expiration date was okay?
Yes.
So 2 or 3 days before the murder, he says he's going to up your whole life.
Yes.
And he had also said that, quote, you're a piece of he's tired of Phoebe being bounced around like a hot potato.
Yes.
And you were giving him money for the lawyer?
I gave him some, yes.
And you took care of Phoebe?
Yes.
And you were watching Phoebe prior to this murder within the past couple months?
6 months. 6 months.
6 months, okay. And he would stay there on and off as well, right?
Only through the Christmas holidays.
Now, these bizarre things he was telling you that he was your mother and the molesting, he had a habit of doing that, right?
Sometimes.
He would say these bizarre off-the-wall things to mess with people, right?
With me, yes.
And he'd been doing it since he was a teenager, right?
Yes.
Did it all the way up to the time of the murder?
Yes.
Here's one of the most heartbreaking things that Michelle said, particularly when thinking about how Phoebe died.
In 2013, did you have a conversation with the defendant regarding swim lessons for Phoebe?
Yes.
What was that conversation?
Just because she liked to go swimming and everything, but she wanted you to hold her, and she wouldn't go without floaties or anything.
So did you recommend swimming lessons for her?
Yes.
Okay. You said in 2013, you said that she went swimming with floaties. Was the defendant present for such a time?
Yes.
Okay. And she needed floaties and someone to hold her?
She liked somebody to hold on to her, yes.
Okay. And about the last 6 months of her life, were you her primary caregiver?
Yes.
Okay. Has she learned to swim at any time during that time?
No.
So I think a fair interpretation was he throws her in the water. She wouldn't have survived anyway. But knowing she didn't know how to swim, having this conversation with his mom, it is just so chilling. Well, after 7 hours of deliberations, the jury came back with their verdict.
The matter of State of Florida versus Jonchuck, case number 15-00226 CF, murder in the first degree. We, the jury, find as follows as the defendant in this case. The defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree as charged. So say we all signed and dated for person of the jury.
Yep, they did not believe that Jonchuck was insane at the time he killed his daughter. No, he was guilty of murder. Simple as that. And with that, Jonchuck was sentenced by Judge Chris Hellinger.
Mr. Jonchuck, it's an automatic life sentence. I'm sure you know that upon your conviction. So I will adjudicate you guilty of murder in the first degree. I will sentence you to life in prison.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yep, life in prison for the child murderer. And despite his attorney's attempt to get him a new trial, including arguing that the prosecution's experts testified incorrectly about a psychological examination test, the judge denied the request. So in the end, after everything we heard and thinking about Phoebe, an innocent little girl, thinking about what she had to go through in her last moments at the hands of her father, you know what I say about Jonchuck? Good riddance. That's all we have for you here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.